tell people that
Awesome.
if they signed up, they could get a recording to the playback. Okay, so Sarah, you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in today. It's great to see all of you here. And Sarah and I have put in a lot of time on this, so we really hope that you get the value that you're seeking. And we want to introduce to you somatic paths to healing through the lens of trauma. So understanding yourself and trauma's impact. This is basically a healing and resilience workshop, and we're gonna get started. So, just to introduce myself briefly, I am the founder of TRE. You see the little logo right here, and I'm also a somatic experiencing coach and a trauma informed care consultant. And Sarah?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Genke. I'm founder of Reset Resiliency. I'm also a nervous system and TRE coach. We'll get into what TRE is in a little bit, and I'll save the mystery for you.
Great. So, before we get started, I want to pose this question to each of you here. What brought you into this space? Beyond the invitation from Sarah and me, I'm sure there's something else that brought you into this space, and just take a minute or two to consider that. All right, and the next thing we're gonna do is a little brief exercise. It is foundation for all of my coaching clients. It's grounding, breath awareness, and body scan. And the reason why it's foundational is because it helps to put you in touch with what's happening in your body. It brings your attention to the present. So before we get into the exercise, I am going to break it down for you. What is grounding? Grounding is basically feeling grounded in yourself, feeling centered in your body, and it's basically connecting to the present moment through the senses and physical sensations. So physical sensations, what you feel in your body, what you feel around you, the seat beneath your butt. That's grounding. What is breath awareness? I'm sure all of you know this, but just to bring it into sharper focus, breath awareness is focused attention on natural breathing rhythm for relaxation and mindfulness. And what is body scan? So a body scan, if you imagine a scanner going down your body, that's a body scan, but you're doing it with an awareness, your own self-awareness. So you start typically either from the top of your head all the way down to your toes, or from your toes up to your head. So it is a mindfulness technique focusing on various body parts to heighten awareness of physical sensations, reduce tension, and promote relaxation. So the benefits to this three components that we're going to work through in an exercise in a few is that it promotes stress reduction, it induces relaxation, and gives you a sense of calm. It helps with emotional regulation. So when you're feeling really angry, like when you're feeling really overwrought, or even if you're in a feeling of being stuck or frozen, this is a great exercise to do. It helps with improved focus. So it helps you to enhance mental clarity, concentration, and task focus. It also helps with developing self-awareness. So instead of like just doing things automatically, without any degree of mindfulness, you're able to deeply connect to the present or be aware of what you're doing, be aware of the thoughts that you have, the emotions that you have, and it just brings you to a more mindful state. And finally, it supports physical well-being. It helps with your lung capacity, blood pressure regulation, stress regulation. So it helps with so many different things. So this is something that's foundational for all the clients that I have. I always bring them through it. Okay, so we're gonna get started. Welcome to this 3-minute guided grounding and breath awareness and body scan session. This brief exercise is designed to bring you into the present moment. Now, find a comfortable space, either seated or lying down, and let's begin. Start by bringing your attention to the support beneath you. If you are sitting, feel the contact of your body with the chair or floor. If you're lying down, notice the surface supporting you. Take a deep breath in through your nose, hold, then exhale slowly through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose, hold, then exhale slowly through your mouth. And as you breathe out, release any tension or stress you may be holding. And let each breath anchor you in the present moment. In through your nose, hold, then out through your mouth. In through your nose, hold, and out through your mouth. Now, as you focus on your breath, feel the natural rhythm of your breath as you inhale gently and exhale slowly. Notice the rise and fall of your chest and the expansion and contraction of your abdomen. And if your mind starts to wander, just gently guide it back to the sensation of your breath. In through your nose, hold, then out through your mouth. As you do this, simply allow your breath to be a source of calming and centering. Now, bring your awareness to your body. Starting from the top of your head, slowly scan down to your toes. And as you do, notice any areas of tension or relaxation. And with each breath, invite those areas to soften. If you encounter any tension, visualize it melting away with each exhale. Breathe in through your nose, hold, and out through your mouth. In through your nose, hold, and out through your mouth. And keep going. Now, take a moment to appreciate the grounded and centered feeling you've cultivated. Gently wiggle your fingers and toes, becoming aware of your surroundings. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Take a moment to thank yourself for this time of self-care and awareness, and observe any changes in your state of mind or relaxation in your body. How was that exercise for you? Feel free to just type in response in there if you felt any changes in your sensation, what it felt like for you. All right, thank you so much for participating. And the reason why we do that is because we want to create space in us. Space for our thoughts, space for our emotions, space for ourselves. One of my favorite quotes by Viktor Frankl, who is an Austrian psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, and who also wrote the book men's search for meaning is this beautiful quote. It's between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And when we go through certain hard things in life, it's very easy to collapse, to get frozen, and it's part of our body's way of protecting us. But we can move out of that state. And that was my journey as well. So this is what I always share with other people. This is my own quote. Healing starts with awareness and learning to be kind to oneself. And that's when my healing journey started, when I actually understood the mind-body connection, and I understood that, I could start to treat myself with kindness, treat my body with kindness, and to change the way that I saw myself. And so that was fundamental to my healing. Bessel van der Kolk, psychiatrist and author of the book The Body Keeps the Score, has this wonderful quote as well. He said, "The trauma is not the story of something that happened back then. It's the current imprint of that pain, horror, or fear living inside people. Trauma isn't something that lives outside of the person." So he talks about this gnawing feeling or this sense of unease, as you go through the day. And a lot of times it manifests as anxiety, fear, stress. And I think all of us are familiar with that. It shows up in your body, the back tightness in your neck. And so today, Sarah and I are going to walk you through how to come home to your bodies. But before we do that, we're going to talk about what trauma is. And Sarah will lead us through this.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for that warming grounding. I definitely needed that. So thank you. So what is trauma? For today's conversation, we kind of just wanted to flush out the definition and make sure that everyone's on the same page. So trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. Trauma really refers to a psychological, emotional, or physical response to an event or series of events that are distressing or harmful. These events are typically extreme and can overwhelm the individual's ability to cope, leaving a lasting psychological and sometimes physical effects on that individual. Trauma can result from one single distressing experience or from chronic exposure to harmful or threatening situations. If someone talks about their lives as like a pre and then a post, or their life is kind of divided into before and after, that's probably a pretty good indication that someone has experienced some trauma. So let's talk about what I call the different types of trauma, big T versus little t. So a big T trauma, the DSM-5, defines PTSD trauma as any situation where one's life or bodily integrity is threatened. These are typically what we call those large T traumas that can be seen as war, natural disasters, or sexual or physical abuse. On the other hand, little t traumas, they're less severe, but they're still distressing events that can accumulate over time and often does not lead to a pure PTSD symptoms, but can cause trauma responses, including increased distress and decreased quality of life. So those can look like divorce or interpersonal conflict, emotional abuse, and or financial insecurity. So building off on this idea that trauma comes in many different contexts and whatnot, a lot of us, when we think about trauma, think purely about childhood trauma, right? That's what we think of. However, there's a bunch of different, what I call flavors of trauma or types or contexts of trauma. So, of course, we have the classic PTSD, that's also known as shock trauma. We have CPTSD, that's chronic or complex trauma, and that is within relationships. We also have secondary or vicarious trauma. And this is something that I feel like goes under the radar for a lot of people in first respondents positions, nurses, doctors, people that are working with populations that are experiencing firsthand trauma. That definitely impacts you and falls under this secondary or vicarious trauma. Other things too are grief. We have cultural trauma, intergenerational, childhood trauma, as I mentioned before. We have racial trauma. We have relational trauma, religious trauma, medical trauma, sexual trauma, and then trauma around. We have actual birth, and then perinatal trauma. I think also one thing to just know with these couple of slides that trauma is really subjective. These are not like hard and fast rules. It really depends on how that event has made an impact on that individual and their nervous system, which now is really dictating how they show up in certain situations or relationships. So we're going to get everyone a little bit, active and get the chat going. So we're going to have some fun with a heavy topic. So this is a little quiz, I guess, or a fun little guessing game. We're going to go through some of these current situations that are happening, and then you're going to guess if it's CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD. So the first one, everyone pull up your chat, and I'd love for you to fire away your answers when I say go. So the first one, it's a child in the home who's experiencing divorce. They're experiencing constant conflict, some neglect, and some identity issues. Would you say this is CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD? Go ahead and put those answers in the chat. Hey, we have a variety of answers. Okay. This first one is actually CPTSD. So those who guessed that, you are correct. All right, moving on to number 2. We have an employee at work who is experiencing workplace harassment, and the dynamic is between their boss and themselves. Is this CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD? All right. Everyone's saying PTSD for this one, almost in solidarity. This is actually CPTSD. Yes, Kai, you got it right. Surprising, yes. Number 3. Wait, you asked
CPTSD. So
CPTSD.
who is asking which one is that again? So CPTSD and CPTSD, typically the way that you distinguish PTSD and CPTSD is CPTSD tends to happen within relationship, and it tends to be over a longer stretch of time as a build up. Whereas PTSD is like usually one-off incident, like a car crash or like an assault or something like that. But CPTSD happens over a longer time and within relationship.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Moving on to number 3, we have a wife at home who's experiencing abuse. It's physical, it's emotional, and psychological, all 3. Is this CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD? You've got some scattered answers. So actually, all of you are right. This is CPTSD and PTSD. Yes.
Yeah, so it can be PTSD because if there's a violent assault, it could lead to a sense of threat to one's life, and so that typically anything that can really make you feel like you could lose your life is considered PTSD. And the CPTSD part is the ongoing emotional abuse. It's the so that's the complex post-traumatic stress disorder part that happens within relationship.
Thanks for diving into that nitty-gritty, Deborah. All right, let's finish off here these last 3. We have a teenager, they're commuting, they're in a car accident, and they lose a limb. Is this CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD? Right. Y'all are
Everybody got it right.
Yes,
Yay.
on the money. This is PTSD.
Yeah.
Great. All right, number 5, we have a child at school who's experiencing bullying and being picked on by other students. You know what to do.
Yeah. Wow, everybody's on the same page. Everybody's getting it right now. Yeah. It is very clear.
Yes, this is CPTSD. All right, last one here. So we have a young adult. They are in relationship with friends. They experience a betrayal and their reputation is damaged by those that she trusted. Is this CPTSD, secondary trauma, or PTSD? Very nice. Again, scattered answers. Oh, I love this. This is CPTSD. Again, this is happening over a period of time in relationships. So
And
thank you,
just to
everyone. Oh, go ahead.
And just to kind of touch briefly on secondary trauma, because we didn't provide an example for it. So secondary trauma is like a child, for example, watching their parents fighting, or and just being exposed to that, or like even hearing about your friend who went through maybe, um, sexual assaults. Like that could also have an impact on you as the person listening. So that's some degree of secondary trauma or vicarious trauma based off of that. Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the yeah, Sarah, please, yeah, go ahead.
No worries. Yes.
Okay.
So these are the answers. I'd be curious. Vicarious trauma. Got you. Yes. Kwaku Angelo. That's right. I remember you. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on. Deborah, you ready?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that we may experience, psychological symptoms, I should say, when going through trauma. So, number one, we can experience flashbacks, and this is re experiencing the traumatic event through intrusive and vivid memories. They could also be nightmarish and or dissociative episodes. Going along with that, those intrusive thoughts, those are really unwanted or distressing thoughts related to the traumatic event that really intrude on a person's consciousness. Avoidance is another one that Deborah and I both see in our work. This really has to do with efforts to avoid reminders of the traumatic event, including certain places or people or activities that may trigger that distressing event. And then one more I'll just highlight is hypervigilance. This is an increased state of alertness and a heightened sensitivity to potential threats, leading to an exaggerated startle response, and really just an overall difficulty of relaxation or a difficulty to relax. So, along with psychological symptoms, we do experience some bodily symptoms as well. These are what we would really call those somatic symptoms. So, number one, trouble with like breathing and posture, loss of balance or coordination, tightness around the neck or the jaw or the face. Again, not making or not breathing very well, and or really not being able to make contact, or you're just like looking down quite a bit. Physical pain and tension. This is an area that I specialize in with individuals. This is really around the idea that trauma can be associated with a chronic pain or muscle tension and headaches and other physical discomforts. So, what happens is when we don't process trauma or that energy, it gets stuck and stored inside of our body and then manifests as illnesses and diseases. And so, I help individuals really shake that out. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The last one I just wanted to mention here on the list was sleep disturbances. So trauma can really lead to difficulties being able to fall asleep or stay asleep and experiencing restlessness. Nightmares and night terrors, of course, can occur as well.
And Sarah, so Alex is asking
Oh,
what are somatic symptoms, so we can just explain that.
yeah. So great question. Somatic symptoms are really symptoms that we may feel that don't have a direct medical connection to. So, for example, someone might feel like there's something stuck in their throat and they've gone to the doctor and the doctor has cleared them. They said there's nothing stuck there, but yet they feel it's really hard to swallow, breathe, or sometimes talk. That's a somatic symptom in the body. Great question.
And
Deborah, do you have
there's no
something to?
medical, yeah, there's no medical basis for it. But it nonetheless they still feel it, and so like they will tend to doctor will tend to say, oh, it's all in your head, right? But that's not really, it's not all in your head, it's in your body, and you're feeling something, your body's trying to tell you something, but the
Mhm.
doctors
What?
can't explain what.
Damn.
Yeah.
What, motherfucker?
What?
Damn.
Kyla.
All
Oh,
right.
hello.
She's an
Okay,
amazing
so
human.
okay, great. All right, so now
Sorry about
and
that. My dog was bothering me. I'm so sorry.
yeah, no worries. Welcome on board. So we didn't go deep into each of these symptoms or like psychological body symptoms. But if you have any questions, please feel free to stay behind later on. We're moving on because we only have an hour. And now I'm going to take over and going to talk about how actually trauma affects your brain. So basically, when you've gone through, unremitting stress, when you grow up in a home where you were emotionally neglected or there was abuse, or you go through, a car crash that changes your life, all of these life-changing episodes that we talked about earlier, it comes in many different contexts. Trauma comes in all shapes and sizes, as we mentioned earlier. So what happens is that your brain actually changes. So we're going to start with looking at the various parts of the brain that get affected by trauma. The amygdala is at the back of your brain right here. It's a little small part of your brain. Nonetheless, it does a lot in your brain. It's basically like the smoke alarm of your brain. And so it senses danger, and it's a fear sensing part of your brain as well. So it processes a lot of your emotions. And so if you imagine a smoke alarm in your home, it goes off, right, whenever there's smoke. And that's fine if there's actually smoke, but if in your day-to-day life, your amygdala is like oversensitized, what happens is that even if there's no smoke, it goes off. And that's why people sometimes get triggered easily and they end up overreacting. It is because they're reacting to something in the past, in present day time. So that's the smoke alarm of your brain. The next part of the brain that we want to look at is your hippocampus, which acts as a filing cabinet for your memory. It's a part of your brain that deals with memory. And for people who have not been able to process some of the trauma, they get stuck sometimes in the past. They get drawn back to the past. They get into all these reveries, or like they find it hard to be present and focused in what they're actually called to do. Like something in the present reminds them of the past, and then they find it hard to focus in that sense. Your smoke alarm goes off all the time, and well, I think that a lot of people can relate to that as well, especially when you're going through something hard, right? When you're going through a lot of stress. Okay, the next part of the brain that I want to focus on is the mid-anterior cingulate cortex. As you can see, it regulates empathy, awareness. It registers physical pain. It also regulates heart rate and blood pressure, and it also coordinates your emotions and thinking. Okay, so this is part of your brain that has a lot to do with, like actually planning, thinking, focusing, coordinating. So if this part of your brain is affected, it's also going to be hard for you to focus present time and get things done. It's hard for you to be aware of what's going on around you. You're kind of stuck in your own world a lot of the time. And the next part of your brain that gets affected as well is the prefrontal cortex, which Bessel van der Kolk likes to call it the watchtower, because it's like you're zoomed out and then you have like this, top-down view of everything that's going on. So like a hawk's view of everything that's going on. So you're not too close to something. So you have a little bit more distance and objectivity. So this part of the brain is to do, I'm sure a lot of you will know, it's, prefrontal cortex is the logical part of the brain. It's to do with decision making. It interprets emotions. It understands the context of a situation, and it helps with regulation of emotion and attention. So if you think of like a seesaw, your amygdala is weighing in on your emotions, and then the prefrontal cortex is like balancing that out, right? And if all of these parts of the brain have been thrown off balance by a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, then it's no wonder that you might have very strong startle responses, right? Because you're in a state of hyperarousal all the time. You're very, you tend to be reactive, and it's all because of what's actually happening in your brain. So from this, these different parts of the brain, I want to go on to talk about what Bessel van der Kolk likes to call the mohawk of the brain. Okay, and this is to do with the midline structures of your brain. So you're like your prefrontal cortex, your mid-anterior cingulate cortex, the hippocampus. So it goes right down the middle of that, right? So this part of the brain, which he calls the mohawk of the brain, actually mediates what we call consciousness, our sense of self, like our self-awareness of who am I? It's like the part of the brain that will ask you, I don't know if you ever watched Zoolander, but you know the part where you're like, who am I? You know, and so it's that part that brings you into that sense of attention. It brings the attention to yourself, and it has to do with that this part of the brain is called also when you're literally doing nothing, like people who haven't really gone through a lot of trauma and they're like what you call normal, so to speak, tend to fall into this default state network, the idling brain. This part of the brain, when they're idling, it lights up. It's called the mohawk. It lights up, and the attention is brought back to themselves. Okay, so so basically for normal subjects in this research that they did in the lab, okay, when they scan their brains, they're in idling mode. The default state network would be activated, so the attention is brought to themselves. Okay, so whereas when they did the same test, brain scans of subjects with histories of severe chronic childhood abuse, this part of the brain significantly was offline. It was not activated. Okay, so all of these subjects displayed chronic PTSD. And these self-sensing areas of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, and the parietal cortex were not online. So the interpretation of these results was that in response to coping with unremitting dread and trauma when they were younger, these patients had learned to shut down the brain areas that transmit visceral feelings and emotion that accompany and define terror. So at some point, your body keeps sending signals like everything's not okay, everything's not all right, I'm scared, everything. But as a child, you couldn't run away, right? You couldn't just be like, smell you later. So they just kind of had to find a way to shut it down. And so that's where the mind and body connection gets broken. And that Sarah and I are in the business of helping people to restore that mind and body connection. So just briefly, the idling brain or the default state network has to do with introspection, daydreaming, creating that sense of self-awareness, the processing of personal memories and emotions. So basically any disruption to this network can lead to difficulties in regulating emotions. And it can lead to difficulty in integrating different experiences into your self-narrative to form something that is coherent. And of course, it finally leads to difficulty with coping with traumatic experiences because these traumatic experiences in large have actually not been processed or integrated into the self. Now, how does trauma affect your brain? Here are some brain scans. So this is from the Radiological Society of North America. You can see in the top scan that these brains were not of people who didn't have PTSD. Okay, and these are the brain scans of people with PTSD, and you can see that there's a stark difference. More parts of the brain are lit up here, whereas more parts of the brain here are offline. And you can see in the prefrontal cortex region that there's a lot more activity in the brains of people without PTSD as compared to that of people with PTSD. And this was a brain scan of earthquake survivors. Okay, this next fMRI is that of a child who had CPTSD. So this Romanian orphan who was institutionalized shortly after birth was underwent extreme deprivation in infancy, so emotional neglect, lack of touch, lack of care, and you can see, compare that to the healthy brain on the left. Right? So the healthy brain is really well lit up, especially in the prefrontal cortex. Whereas you can see like very significant parts of the brain here, especially down the midline structure, you can see it's completely offline. So these parts of the brain actually regulate emotion. The temporal lobes, right here, the circle parts regulate emotion and receive input from the senses, and they are offline. And so such children will inevitably suffer from emotional and cognitive problems, and yeah, that's actually really sad, right, when you think about it, because they didn't choose to be in the position, but it's what happened to them, and they're affected, their brains are affected. So it's very little to do with choice, actually. Let's look at this brain scan of a couple. So this is the guy, and then this is his wife, and they went through a really horrific car accident, and you can see that they both coped differently. So if you look at their brain scan, so this is um, years after the horrific incident that completely changed their lives. And they agreed to go through this experiment where the script of what they had gone through was read out to them while they were in a scanner, and it triggered them into being in the brains becoming into the state. So the wife, she learned how to cope when she was young. She grew up in an abusive home by just completely dissociating. So you can see that her brain completely went offline. And when she was asked later on, like, what did you feel? She just said, I felt nothing. So she learned how to dissociate. You can see so much of her brain was just offline. So she, when the car crash happened, she just stayed there. She didn't actually try to get out. She just stayed there, like in a state of frozenness. Whereas this is the husband, and you can see like parts of his brain are more lit up than others. The right side of the brain is more lit up, and the right side has traditionally been more often associated with things like imagery, art, music. So it's like the more I guess like intuitive part of your brain, whereas the left side is more to do with logic, reasoning, planning, sequential thinking. So so as you can see, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is also offline, and these parts are like it's like the timekeeper of your brain. So people who have gone through trauma and who get triggered, sometimes they are not able to kind of tolerate difficult things, or not say difficult things, but it's almost as if they might not seem to have as much patience. But that's because also the sense of time, or the sense that this is going to come to an end, is not as developed, because these parts of the brain are actually offline when they get triggered. So for people who are, for example, not as easily triggered, we are like, yeah, this sucks. I don't want to have to go through this, but it's going to come to an end, and we have that awareness, past, present, future. Whereas for a lot of people in that moment who are triggered and haven't worked past their trauma, they're just feeling overwhelmed by the sense that this is never going to end. And I've been there. So so as you can see as well in this brain scan, the right amygdala is completely lit up, and that's the part that the emotional processing center of your brain, and it's on overdrive. And so you can see and that two different people who went through the same episode experienced it differently. They had different coping mechanisms, but it's still through their brains completely off balance. Now, this is a composite brain scan of 8 participants who also had gone through trauma. Also agreed to, this research study, because they wanted to be able to, whatever results that came out, to help other people who are dealing with trauma as well, to understand themselves. So what the trauma scripts, which were very highly individualized, were read out to each individual while they were in the brain scan. And as you can see on the right limbic area, there are bright spots in the limbic brain. And then, so that right limbic area also is the part to do with emotion, helps you to it's a fear sensing part of your brain as well, and it's highly sensitized, right? And then you have the visual cortex, which also shows heightened activation. So that's why when you have flashbacks, that's a part of your brain that gets lit up as well. And then finally, in C, drawing C, you see this part of the brain is called Broca's area, and that part is the speech center. And as indicated, it showed markedly decreased activation. So when you talk about trauma, sometimes you say there are no words for it, and the speechless horror, and it's literally because this part of the brain that mediates speech is actually offline. Okay, so that's why sometimes it's just not easy to talk about what you've gone through, just because of this part of the brain that's affected as well.
Deborah, there's a question in the chat from Emily. So
okay, if someone with CPTSD heals from their trauma through therapy, is it possible that their brain scan would? Yes, definitely. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit, about how you can rewire your brain by rewiring your nervous system. So stick around for that, Emily. Thank you for your question. So I want to just briefly read to you this, beautiful quote from Bessel van der Kolk. about the brain, imagination, and healing, and we're going to touch on that point that you brought up, Emily. Imagination is absolutely critical to the quality of our lives. Our imagination enables us to leave our routine everyday existence by fantasizing about travel, food, sex, falling in love, or having the last word. All things in life, all the things that make life interesting. Imagination gives us the opportunity to envision new possibilities. It's an essential launch pad for making our hopes come true. It fires our creativity, relieves our boredom, alleviates our pain, enhances our pleasure, and enriches our most intimate relationships. When people are compulsively and constantly pulled back to the past, to the last time they felt intense involvement and deep emotions, they suffer from a failure of imagination, a loss of mental flexibility. Without imagination, there is no hope, no chance to envision a better future, no place to go, no goal to reach. Okay, and now we're gonna go into the mind-body connection. So, Emily, stay tuned. What is the mind-body connection? So I talked about it briefly. It's basically where you have an awareness of what's going on in your body, and the messages from your body go up to your brain, and you are able to integrate both of it. But for a lot of us, when we've gone through enormous trauma, sometimes we just live in our heads. It's almost like someone used an analogy like a head on a stick. You're walking around like a head on a stick. So somatic trauma-informed coaching empowers you to basically heal this mind-body connection through what we call the window of tolerance. So if you imagine yourself like you're a car, right? So when your car is performing optimally, you could be in cruise control, you could be in gear 4, gear 5, and you're coasting down that highway, you tune into what's going on, everything's flowing, it's smooth. So the body is in an optimal state, and and when you're in a state, you can access both reason and emotion. You are mentally engaged and present in the moment. Now, imagine flooring the accelerator of your car, like just keep constantly flooring it. That brings you in a state of hyperarousal. So you're overly stimulated, and in response, you're overreactive, you have unclear thoughts, you're emotionally distressed. Okay, and so when you keep flooring the accelerator, at some point your car is gonna your engine is gonna break down, right? If you don't give it any rest, you don't bring it back to the window of tolerance or cruise control. And it goes from the state of hyperarousal to hypoarousal, which is basically shut down. Right? So maybe you come back home after a full day of work, you're just like so shut down, you don't want to do anything except watch TV. Okay, so that's a state where you could be lethargic, numb, unmotivated, and sometimes even depressed. So that's a state of hypoarousal. So what we do in somatic trauma-informed coaching is to basically help you widen your window of tolerance. Because as you go through life, it's just inevitable. Life will bring its stresses, things don't go according to plan, and you're constantly having to adjust, right? So what we do is we help you to widen your window of tolerance so that you don't end up going into a state of hyperarousal or hypoarousal as easily. Or if you do, you know how to come back, to bring yourself back to that window of tolerance again. So basically, we give you the tools to move back from a state of dysregulation to that of calm and connection where you feel in sync with other people around you. And now I want to talk briefly about emotions versus triggers, right? So I just want to talk about what is the commonalities between the both of them. What are the commonalities? So in both situations, nervous system is dysregulated, and if you don't manage them, if you don't pay attention to them, and you try to push it away, it can lead to avoidance. And in both instances, I just want to point out that whatever you're feeling, whenever you get triggered, actually there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Like all of the ways that you adapted when you're younger or when you went through some traumatic episode, that was adaptive. It's just that now you realize it may not be serving you anymore, so you want to find a way to move past your triggers. Now let's talk about what's the difference between triggers and emotions. So triggers are basically rooted in the past. So it could be subconscious. You may not even realize you're doing it until you sit down with someone and talk through your patterns, right? And it's in response to traumas. As we mentioned, it's based in the past. It's highly personalized. So something like someone could be asking you like, "Oh, where did you go to study?" And then that could trigger you, right? Whereas for most people, you're like, "Huh, like why would that trigger you?" Like it's a normal question, but maybe you went through something in school that you don't want to talk about, or that you just don't feel you have good associations with what you've been through before. So it's highly personalized, okay, and it's very subjective, and it's something that needs to be safely processed and can often be subconscious. Okay, emotions. As we go through a day, we're going to experience a plethora of emotions, and this is all normal, and it's just part of how we're wired. And I want to underline that these emotions need to be felt, and it's universally experienced. We all feel things like pain, anger, sadness, joy, peace, hope, love, right? So, and it's all based in the present as it's happening to us. We can feel it, and it's the result of sensory input. Okay, and so it's only when if you've become adapted, for example, bearing your anger, that you might not be comfortable experiencing some of these emotions. So it can lead to avoidance once again if it's not managed. And now Sarah will talk to us about the nervous system.
Wow. I'm just buzzing with all of that beautiful information. I know we've practiced before and I've sat through it, but you learn something new every time. So thank you for sharing that wisdom. So the autonomic nervous system, we'll get into a picture in a second of the entire nervous system, what it's comprised of and what it does. However, the autonomic nervous system is really the foundation of our lived experiences. I call it kind of like the lens in which we look through life. So if we grew up with a lot of trauma and we didn't really know when there was going to be an end to that, we're going to see obstacles as things that are going to be really hard for us to overcome. So why even bother? Why even try? There's some of that avoidance. Whereas others who have maybe perhaps dealt with supportive parents or have dealt with obstacles, they're going to be able to be more resourceful and be able to pull themselves through onto that other side where they really see that light. So this is our nervous system. It can be a little daunting, don't worry. I'm going to break it down for us. So we have two main parts to our nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which is really just consisting of the brain and the spinal cord, which is the central part here of the nervous system. And it receives, interprets, and integrates information from the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system really coordinates and controls those voluntary bodily activities, and it has a lot to do with our decision making and our memory. So moving over to the peripheral, that really extends to the rest of the body. So that's in our arms and our legs and our hands and our feet. The peripheral connects to the CNS and the rest of the body, and it really transmits sensory and motor signals. We look into the peripheral, there's two branches there. We have the somatic and the autonomic. We touched a little bit on the autonomic, but the somatic really controls the voluntary movements, whereas the autonomic controls the involuntary movements, such as our heartbeat and digestion, things like that. So what we're going to dive into tonight is that sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which Deborah already touched on in the window of tolerance graphic that we looked at before. So the sympathetic, you can think of it as the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic is the brake. Don't really want to be on one or the other. We want to find that optimal range of where we have enough gas pedal. Maybe we take our foot off and then we put the brakes on a little bit and really find that groundedness, that space within us. So let's take a look at the sympathetic and the nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system a little bit more. So the sympathetic, you may know of as fight and flight. That is really going to get those pupils dilated. Your airways are going to constrict or dilate, excuse me, so that you can get more oxygen and breathe. Just imagine yourself running. You don't want to have constricted airways when you're trying to get as much oxygen in your lungs as possible to run away from that threat. Another thing that happens with this is the heart rate increasing, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. I may or may not have a little bit of that right now as I'm doing this talk. And then looking on the other side, the parasympathetic, that is really that rest and digest. That's that break once again. And our pupils are going to go back and relax to its normal state. Airways are going to go back to their normal state, maybe constrict a little bit, and then our heart rate's going to slow down. So this is polyvagal theory. This is really the work, the basis that my work and Deborah's work is based off of. You can kind of layer it with the window of tolerance. It's just a little bit of a different way of looking at it. So this was developed by Dr. Stephen Spores in the 90s. And before any of this really came out, it was thought that we were either stressed or not stressed. That's not so much the case. We've actually got a couple different layers within our nervous system itself. And so let's start at the bottom. So social engagement, that is what we call ventral vagal. And that is where you're going to feel that calmness, that centeredness, grounded, being open, curious, and really going to be able to be innovative. Leaders that are looking for their teams to be creative and be innovative, they need to be in this state in order to really contribute to that. So let's say though, a trigger happens. Someone asks you, like Deborah talked about, where did you go to school? You're going to get a little alerted. You're going to maybe notice your body kind of orienting to the threat. And then if that threat continues, we're going to move into fight or flight. So these two are really kind of like a scale. So on one side for the fight, we have like a minor frustration. All the way on the other side, we have pure rage. When we flip that for flight, on the one side of the scale, we're going to have worry and concern, anxiety, fear, and then all the way to panic attacks. And then what happens if we can't fight or flight is we're going to move into this freeze state. And so freeze is really that deer in the headlights, not able to move, not able to speak, really just kind of being stuck there. It is exactly what it sounds like. And so if we can't fight or flight or freeze, then we're going to essentially prepare for death. And you may see this in some wild videos out in like Africa. If a lion is chasing, let's say a hyena, for example, and the hyena is like, I cannot escape this in any way possible. I'm just going to fall over and play dead. That is the state in which that hyena's nervous system and body is preparing itself for. And so some of the things that come along with that in human form are really numbing or just wanting to disappear, isolation, feeling helplessness, feeling depression, disassociating. Perhaps you're feeling suicidal, you're having shame, you're feeling hopeless and trapped. Maybe you're confused or just trying to like get through the day and going through the motions, really feeling checked out. So I know this can be a lot to take in, and I don't want you to get hung up on the names. What's important to get across in this graphic is that none of these states are inherently bad. Our nervous system has evolved for us to be protected. And so the sympathetic and the dorsal vagal states, those are over 5 million years old. Our ventral vagal portion of our nervous system hasn't evolved until 200 million years ago. And so there's about a $300 million years of difference between those two. And so we really need that second nervous system, the 2 million-year-old nervous system, the ventral vagal, to kind of catch up and evolve along with us, because what's happening for people is that they are experiencing the same kind of reaction as being chased by a lion as they are when they get a text from their boss saying, hey, can we talk, with no context. And so until we can get leaders all on board with this and understand how people are showing up to work and in their homes are exactly the same, we as individuals have to take ownership over our own self-regulation, meaning having the tools to be able to come back down that curve and ground into social engagement and ventral vagal. So, yeah, any questions on that so far?
Yeah, so just in the view of time, we're gonna keep the questions to the last
Sure.
half an hour. So just thanks Sarah for that. So basically, how do you know you've healed from trauma? It means that you've healed when you better understand your triggers. You understand how to cope when you're triggered, and then you realize over time you're less easily triggered. And also, when you do get triggered, you're able to process your feelings and bounce back more quickly. And so that's the part about resilience that we are going to touch on briefly. But just before we do that, want to just really, really give you some examples of how trauma could affect your relationship with yourself and with others. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you came here because of relational issues as well. I mean, we're all human beings and we all need to, you know, be able to have relationships, in order to survive. And I think that relationships enriches our lives, and we do want to have meaningful and fulfilling relationships. So let's look at how trauma can actually affect your relationships with not just yourself but with other people too. Okay, so basically, beyond the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response, fight, flight, freeze response over here are all in gray. We all know that. Sarah talked about it. There's what you call the please and appease response, which is also commonly known as the fawn response, and it's mediated by a prefrontal cortex, is the um, logical center of your brain, where you actually fawn someone to, protect yourself in many ways from their wrath, so to speak, right? There's also another response, more lesser known now, but it just was discovered more recently. Um, it's called the attached cry for help. So when you're clinging on to something, you're clinging on, you don't want to let go of this relationship, you're clinging on, and you cry for help because you're afraid of abandonment. Because abandonment often meant death, right? Especially for an infant, abandonment means death. So a lot of this is rooted in some really primal fears. And then finally, there's the collapse and submit response, which is a little bit like freeze, but it's more almost like you are just completely supplicating yourself and, giving in to somebody, and just losing your sense of self again, losing your sense of self. So there's a degree of self-betrayal in that. Now, Emily asked this question earlier: can you heal from trauma? And I want to just to respond to this, I'd love to just briefly read this poem that a friend of mine shared. And so just you can close your eyes, you can just relax, listen. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1: I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2: I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3: I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get up immediately. Chapter 4: I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5: I walk down another street. Okay, and so as that poem encapsulates, when it happens to us the first time around, the second time around, it's not really our fault. But at the end of the day, if it keeps happening, and that's because of the patterns that have been, the grooves that are in our brain, right? We default to the same patterns. We're creatures of habit. So we tend to repeat the same action until we finally learn. And that part, the learning part, that's our responsibility. And so Sarah and I always bring this to our clients, and a big component of how we help our clients move through their triggers, move through the issues that they are working with, is through trauma-informed care. So we shift the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Like someone fell into that manhole, right? There's nothing wrong with them. Anybody who falls into a manhole will get hurt. So the first pillar in trauma-informed care is developing that sense of safety. And within an organizational level, we want people to feel psychologically safe. And we empower leaders to be able to create that sense of psychological safety, first within themselves and then in the teams. And then the second pillar is trustworthiness and transparency. So decisions are made with transparency with the goal of building and maintaining trust. Trust is the currency of trauma-informed care. So the third pillar is collaboration. So basically in this state, it's not a top-down dynamic where somebody's telling you, oh, this is how you get better, or this is how you should do things. No, there is a sense of deep collaboration, even if you're the leader or even if you come in for a session, we want to know how we can collaborate and work together. There is a sense of co-creation in that entire process, and power differences are actually leveled. And the fourth pillar is that of empowerment and trauma-informed care. We're actually helping you to peel away layers to access your internal agency. So the part of the brain that was the mohawk of the brain, the midline structures that was not online, we're gonna help you to bring that back through what we do. And so you have the internal agency. So we're peeling away layers to help you access that, to access the internal wisdom, so to speak. And finally, trauma-informed care comes with a sense of cultural sensitivity. So in some cultures, being loud and out there, it's like much more acceptable than in other cultures. And so we want to move, along, with that sense of cultural sensitivity as well in how we implement trauma-informed care processes. So this is a little graphic that I drew to just show my clients like how trauma processing could help them. As you can see in before and after that in the bodies of these little gingerbread men, is that the impact of trauma is a lot bigger. Like the yellow area is spilling out, right, of their bodies, into their actual lives. And it's the felt impact is a lot bigger. It's almost like it's overshadowing their identity even. There are not a lot of positive emotions. There are not a lot of healthy attachments. There's there's not a lot of self-respect, and it's because of the trauma is overshadowing. It almost defined who they are. But when you have been able to process your trauma with someone, in a professional setting, that trauma often shrinks, right? So there are days, time to time, you might get reminded of it, and it might, trigger you a little bit, but then you bounce back more easily. So it doesn't take up as much of your mind space. You have a lot more room to, have positive emotions, to have healthy attachments, and to have self-respect, right? And to focus on things that you really love and enjoy. I'm going to talk briefly about bottom-up and top-down approaches. So you're all familiar with talk therapy. You've seen all these people are, clients talking to their counselors while lying on the couch, and that is traditionally talk therapy. The gold standard of talk therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy, where people are, helped, where the therapist helps the client to reframe what they've gone through, to reason it out, to think about it in a different way. So it changes their perception, it changes their meaning making of what they've gone through. Now, this works if your clients are in a state of calm, they're already grounded, so they can access the prefrontal cortex and actually make sense of what they're talking to you about in that moment. But what happens when you've gone through trauma is that you're in a state of freeze or fear, and you're not grounded, you're just all over the place. So it's actually quite hard for CBT to work in this instance. And because a lot of clients are often in a state of dissociation as well, and you're not being able to focus. So this is where bottom-up approaches comes in. So actually, it helps clients to cope with raw emotions and defense reactions. So things like EMDR, eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, somatic approaches, it actually rewires your nervous system. And oftentimes you don't even need to talk about what you've been through if you're not comfortable. Some people are just not comfortable. And so this is a way for you to process what you've been through. If you want, you can talk. If you don't want, you don't have to. But you can still rewire your brain. It really depends on your comfort level. And just to kind of, dive in a little bit more into top-down processing versus bottom-up processing, is something that happens in all of our lives on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so for example, top-down processing deals with frameworks that are already pre-existing in your mind. If you get a text, for example, from a friend and it's not spelled out correctly, right? Maybe it's missing a word, but you can still make out what your friend is trying to say. It's because there's already a pre-existing framework. You sort of know that friend, what they're like, but you also have an idea of speech and language and models of that in your brain, so you can sort of connect the dots. So top-down processing is working with pre-existing frameworks in your mind. Bottom-up processing, however, deals with actually a sensory stimuli. So it doesn't really deal with whatever's in your mind. It's bottom-up because it comes from an external stimuli, And it doesn't rely on prior knowledge or expectations. It focuses on elemental details of sensory input and gradually builds up to higher level perception and understanding. And so what Sarah and I do is basically bottom-up approach. So it's to do with helping you to get in touch with what's happening within your body, this process of interoception. And so that's somatic experiencing, and TRE, EMDR yoga is also something you can do. And the sensory motor psychotherapy, which is also to do with bottom-up way of processing. So just very briefly, somatic experiencing was developed, a body-oriented approach developed by Peter Levine. And this resulted from multidisciplinary study of stress physiology, pathology, biology, neuroscience, and psychology. And he's had over 50 years of successful clinical application of this. So if you look at this pentagram, you will see that there are 5 components to it. In talk therapy, typically you want to focus, therapy typically focus on behavior and meaning, whereas in somatic experiencing, we focus, apart from behavior and meaning, also on image, sensation, and effect. So we use imagery, we talk about the sensations you're feeling in your body, help you to tune into that, and then also we help you to understand the affect, like how you are showing up, and how other people's affect affects you, because our nervous systems and the way that we talk, our voices, all of this has an impact on how you feel in the moment. So this is what somatic experiencing these are the 5 components that somatic experiencing brings into your session with your coach or therapist. And Sarah can talk briefly about TRE.
Yes. So what is TRE? I'm sure all of you are itching to know. So TRE stands for tension and trauma releasing exercises. And this was developed by Dr. David Berselli. He's got a PhD in social work and he is a field traumatologist. He and Stephen Spores, who came up with polyvagal theory, I think they're doing a webinar coming up really soon, but they collaborate quite a bit. So it's really fun to see all these trauma practitioners working together. Anyways, so TRE is really akin to yoga or Tai Chi, where it consists of a series of exercises that release deep muscular patterns of stress, tension, anxiety, and trauma that get stuck and stored in the body if not felt or processed. It can really involve some of the stretching and then lightly fatiguing of muscles so that we can then tap into this innate shaking and or tremoring, neurogenic tremoring modality that is innate in all mammals. So I don't know if any of you on this call tonight have a dog, but dogs often shake when they're nervous. Maybe their trigger is the mailman or mailwoman or the doorbell or lightning or thunder. That is your dog's natural way of discharging that stress and anxiety of that external trigger or stimulus. With humans, though, what's happened is our prefrontal cortex has really labeled it as weak, weird, or vulnerable, etc. And so we just completely suppress it and or have conditioned ourselves not to do it. And so just to give you a tangible example, if you've ever had to give a talk in front of a team or anytime at all, if you've ever felt shaky, that's really what's going on in your body. Women also experience this quite a bit after birth too. And so my role is really flipping the paradigm on shaking and tremoring because I personally had a very negative association with tremoring as my grandma had Parkinson's. And so when I came across this, I was like, wait, tremoring can be good for us. And yes, it can in certain contexts, in this specific context of neurogenic tremoring. So it's a fantastic tool that's changed my life. And I had to get certified and bring it to people. And so now that's what I do. I work with individuals and groups to teach them this toolkit, this tool to have in their toolkit. So, and then we have a short little video. If you want to just put the video on mute, Deborah, that'd be great.
Hang on.
No worries. Perfect. So this is a video of a gentleman tremoring. So he's actually going through a session with Dr. David Berselli himself, as you can see in that photo in the top left. And what's happening here is he's lightly trembling in his shoulders and his neck and whole vertebrae are kind of extending and stretching, and he's enjoying it. It's not painful. He cracks a smile occasionally and really just allows his body to naturally move in the ways that it needs to in order to really release itself of that stress, tension, and trauma. So this is probably someone who's tremored before. When I work with individuals, we start out really small. We go very, very in increments and titrate so that we're not doing too much at once. And so what you didn't see in this video here is those intro exercises that get to this spot where someone can actually tremor. So little taste of tremoring tonight.
Yeah, and so thank you all for coming and staying until the end. Just to basically let you guys know, there you can scan our link tree, and there are links to I have a podcast, for example, or you can go to my website, or you can where you can actually book a free consult, 30-minute free consult. And so please, like, scan it and stay in touch. Feel free to reach out whenever, if you ever have any questions around this, or of anybody else who might benefit from this, please do share it with them. Thank each of you for participating. Really appreciate you showing up. We had a wonderful time just sharing this with you today. Thank you, and yeah, we've come to an end, and we're gonna hang around for a little bit. If any of you have questions, please feel free to just type it in, or ask it directly. We'll be here for a little bit more. So,
David, do you have a question? Okay, he's just showing support.
Just gratitude. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so go ahead and anyone scan my QR code. It takes you to my LinkedIn and website and all the good things. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Tomas.
Let's grab a screenshot really quick.
Oh yeah, let's grab it. Okay, let's just do it right now. Quick, real
3,
quick.
2, 1. Hold on, one more. I messed that up. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, send it to me, okay?
Okay, yay.
Yay.
I need a couple just in case.
Yeah, we should definitely post this there in LinkedIn.
Definitely.
And we should put a link on it too. Yeah.
Thanks for coming, Kai. Hope you're doing well.
Okay, guys. Well, if nobody has questions, we're gonna drop off. Thank you again for coming, and have a great day, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.